soil erosion?
Well, Gene, we have a number of different techniques that we use in this area of the state to control soil erosion. We build terraces, we use filter strips, we use minimum tillage and no-till farming practices to try and lower as much as possible the soil off the land. So,
Could you explain some of those things?
yes, terraces are basically, we'll go take some pictures of them, but they're basically big long ditches out in the field that control the flow of water, that break up the slope so the speed of water is not as fast, so it does not pick up the soil particles. The idea is you want the soil loss, which is the amount of soil you can lose off an average acre of ground below what is called T, which is tolerable soil loss a year. And that varies for different soil types. How much deeper soils can obviously lose more soil, more particles can still be productive. So,
how did you figure out what T was?
that was actually a program that was developed by the government years ago, and they did studies on the slope, and they're in different soil profiles in which the water absorption factors and
so how would you explain
what we're trying to eliminate here as far as losing soil particles off these fields out here?
You don't want to lose your topsoil with erosion. As growing nutrients go, you need more of a dust bowl effect.
Okay, which is
that a thing? The Dust Bowl thing?
The Dust Bowl was
1930s.
1930s when we had a big drought, lots of wind, all the topsoil went away, so then the farmland was useless, which is when you had a lot of farmers leave their land. So if you can have the same effect with the water pushing away the topsoil, you don't have nutrients. And the only way to kind of cure that is without obviously preventing the topsoil losses, put a lot of fertilizers down, which isn't exactly feasible either. It's a lot of money, a lot of waste.
And then we use things like this bulldozer to build these terraces and the filter strips and the waterways. So Gene, this is another example of erosion control we do. This is called a dry hole structure. This actually has a smaller pipe that goes through that slows the flow of the water when it rains. There's a big rain. This all fills up and it lets the water out slowly instead of going real fast and cutting a big ditch or a gully down here. It also, as you can see here, it allows any soil particles that are in the water to
Gene, this area we're in
now is a lower part of the farm. This little stream that runs through here is actually, this is considered bottom ground. It's not considered highly erodible because it's so flat down here. But as you can see down through here, the wide grass strips, those are called a filter strip, and that will help stop the soil particles from coming off the soil and getting into the water.
And how much deeper do those roots go then?
Oh, in this grass, this is reed canary grass out here, and the roots are 2 or 3 feet, something like that. So, but yeah, so that kind of curves down through here, and the idea is that it keeps the water, slows down the flow of
What
water.
determines if you're going to have a cover crop or not in a certain area?
For me, the determining factor is how much organic matter is left on top of the soil after harvest or after the crop is removed. The difference is that some of the farming practices cut up more of the soil residue than other practices, and this field actually ahead of us here has all been no-tilled, which means the soil has not really been disturbed for 3 or 4 years. And
what do you see with yield then?
the first year it was a little lower, but after that it seems to kind of come back.
Okay.
So, and actually you can see where the rows were there, and then we've left enough residue on top. The idea is that the more of the ground that is covered, the less the raindrop will hit the bare soil to start with.
Okay.
These are examples of terraces right in front of us here. As you can see, it's just a long ditch that runs all the way across the field, or a little like elevation place that actually stops the flow of water down through this area and brings it over to a grass strip, which will stop the soil from running off.
We also do crop rotation.
Not only corn and soybeans, we also raise wheat and oats.
Oh, what can you do with those then? What are those?
Those are wheat is a grain, which is we sell, and oats we use for feed for the cattle.
Okay.
So they're which also breaks up the monoculture and helps the crop rotation, as a general rule, helps the yield of the crop following it. So.
And what do you prefer to feed your cows then? Do you prefer the mash or the oats or?
Oats, of course we use, the cows also will receive hay, big bales of hay, grass hay. We also use feed byproducts, which are what's left over after they make ethanol, the corn gluten, and we also use the hulls off the soybeans, which are called bean hulls. They're made into pellets, and they're kind of a fiber type product. And that's one of the things people don't understand about the ethanol industry. They feel that just by using the ethanol you've destroyed the crop. Well, actually no. The byproduct left is also valuable besides the ethanol. It actually makes a feed. The corn gluten the dried is around 17% protein. So.
Tell me about some more practices that you use to reduce this erosion with no-till farming.
Well, Gene, this planter is equipped to do no-till farming, and in a normal practice, the entire field would be worked by some implement that would disturb all the soil, and actually these little coulters here, as you can see they're called, are wavy, and they actually only work a narrow band of soil through the field. They go like this. It cuts up the residue and makes a little trench to drop the soil in and leaves the soil in between each one of these undisturbed, and since it's undisturbed, it's not nearly as erosive, and it's left more residue on the top. Then the seed drops in these little discs. The seed drops in back here behind it from up in these boxes. A mechanism controls the feed of it, and there's a little deal down here that actually pushes it into the bottom of the trench, and then these wheels push the dirt back over it to make a deal to cover the soil, to cover the seed. So yeah, this is an example of a minimum till, no-till planter.
Okay.
So split each one and it plants it 15 inches apart, which also helps control erosion because there's less of the soil exposed early in the spring when the heavy rains normally occur. And this is an example. The field was originally in wheat. We had no-tilled wheat in here. Then we no-tilled double crop soybeans in it. And after we had done the wheat, we also seeded clover. As you can see, there's clover coming up over this field now, which also protects the soil over the winter to keep it as a cover crop, to keep it from suffering from erosion.
And could you do that season in Iowa? I mean, you have a longer growing season.
I think it would still be possible in Iowa. I'm not sure what they would use as cover crops. That's a new field that's being developed here. There's a lot of research being done on using various legumes. This is this whole field example of where we have no-tilled and then have a cover crop or two.
So do you feel sure to farm in a certain way, or?
There are certain requirements from the government that you are supposed to follow a certain rotation. If you have a thing called a farm plan, you follow a certain rotation pattern, or build terraces, or do something to lower the soil loss.
Okay.
And a lot of your government programs are tied into this program that you have to be eligible to receive some of this stuff. You do have to meet these requirements or designs.
What about from other farmers? Do you feel any?
Probably more the pressure from other farmers is the other way, because they like to have big fields and farm a lot of acres, and obviously when you start doing this kind of stuff, it limits as much. You can't do as much at one time or in one field. So, yeah. And also with the grain prices, commodity prices being the way they are now, there's a lot more demand to farm a lot more of this ground for row crops, for feed grains, because instead of being in grass or being in this kind of stuff, there's more demand for the price of corn and beans both being as high as they are now. There's a lot more marketing opportunities and interest in doing that. That's why a lot of the ground in this area was in the Conservation Reserve Program years ago, which actually the government, you actually seeded it in grass and left it for 10 years plus on a contract. Virtually all of that has come out now and is being farmed.
Okay, so, interesting.
Which has certainly changed the amount of soil loss in this area too.
Sure.
So.
How has soil erosion negatively affected your water quality or crop yields?
Soil erosion strips away the very best part of the soil, the tiny part on the top, which is the interface between the soil and the air. And as it does that, you lose nutrients, which actually causes the soil to be less productive and requires more chemical fertilizers or other things added to it to reach the same yield level as it did before. This is an example of a field. As you can see the difference here, on the grassy side, the corn was cut for silage, which actually takes the entire plant, and the owner has gone back in and seeded annual rye to protect the soil over the winter. To my left here, this was in corn that was harvested with a combine. You can see how there's a lot more residue on the ground to protect soil. And also, by using the cover crops, as you take away the silage, you have taken away part of the nutrients.
Okay.
And the cover crops will help sequester a little more carbon and also help build up the organic matter in the soil to somewhat make up for the amount that you have taken off.
Okay. How does erosion affect water quality?
It can be a problem here because so much of the ground is highly erosive in this area, and the soil actually literally washes down into the creeks and rivers and clear on down into the Mississippi, which can lead to a lot of problems, not only here as far as losing the productive topsoil, but the silting of the rivers, the dead zone at the Gulf of Mexico, which is a result of part of the nutrients flowing down the Mississippi. Actually, there's an area out there, and Mr. Hood could explain that better than I can when we get him here, but that actually destroys part of the sea life cannot live there. So actually, not so much. Yeah, I mean the crops, of course, we do the corn and soybean rotation with the wheat notes working into, but also we rotate the chemicals we use as far as the amount of something to control the weeds, the herbicides, because and I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but Monsanto, originally developed the GMO Roundup Ready soybeans, which were a wonderful thing because the weed pressure had developed in such areas as this where it was very hard to raise soybeans. The Roundup worked so good that everybody used it for the last 15 years. The weed population has shifted, and by using the same thing, the weeds have become resistant to using the Roundup, the glyphosate herbicide on the crops or on the weeds. They actually, it seems to have very little effect when you spray them. That's become a real issue. We have changed, that's part of the rotation we use to break up the weed cycle and patterns, and also we've switched using different chemicals on the soybeans that we raise to help try to avoid that problem also.
So is there just one type of bean or one type of just that Roundup Ready?
It's actually a gene that would be in lots of different varieties of beans, and actually also corn can be genetically modified to be Roundup Ready, where you can actually spray the glyphosate herbicide on it and it won't kill it. We normally don't do as much of that because we're worrying about the volunteer corn coming up from soybeans. So we try to change the mode of action of the chemicals we use each cycle to help break it up. How they're set up. That's one thing that technology has changed a lot on that. Now with GPS, it's a lot easier than it used to be. You don't have to literally go out there and drag a chain and walk it with a level and a stick all the way across the field. So yeah, Gene, down here is an example of this guy that owns this farm is building new terraces here.
Oh, okay.
And you can see these are where the little flag is. That's where the tile outlet comes out.
Okay.
This is a terrace that they're working on. That actually, as you can see, that it breaks up the flow of the water, and where the dirt strips are out here, there are actually big plastic lines that are buried in the ground, and the water will come into the center of it then it will actually pool there, and it lets it out slowly
Oh.
down these tiles, and will come clear out into the ditch. And that's another example of some of the things they do as far as controlling soil erosion in this
How do you
area.
prevent, because I know tiling, it takes the water down so your crops don't flood, right? And it washes them out. How do you control that? And how do you control that from washing away the things that you added to the soil to keep it, like the
The nutrients.
ammonia, yeah, and stuff.
Yes.
and stuff like that.
That's a problem. I mean, you want to have it not lose, so you can use it. One of the things we do as far as one of the nitrogen sources we use for corn, which is a grass, requires nitrogen to grow to its best level, is anhydrous ammonia, and that actually is it's NH3, and it breaks down into elemental nitrogen in the soil. And this time of year, you can have a lot of loss. If the soil temperature becomes too high, it lets the soil microbes break it down too soon, and you can lose it through the rain or something. So we use an additive called N-Serve, which actually is a nitrogen stabilizer, which controls the rate at which it decomposes. So there's not as much danger of losing the nitrogen over the winter. And the other thing to that is it keeps it from getting into the subsoil.
Okay.
Is to the right, orange cage with the yellow top. It's that outlet. Those terraces have been finished.
Okay.
As you can see, the water
Oh, okay.
And as you get down where the ground is more sloped, you move into other soil types. You can see it's just like in a mountain range. It kind of follows the same thing. The closer the lines are together, the steeper the slope is probably.
Okay.
So,
And the more you have to be aware of that region.
yeah. So.
Interesting. So would it be more costly to buy a less eroded? Would it cost more to buy a?
Yeah, as a general rule, the
place.
better in this area at least, the better the ground, the higher it sells for.
Interesting. Okay. Drew, you're a specialist.
Yes.
You're a specialist in what could you inform
I'm
me?
doing my PhD in environmental engineering at the University of Central Florida, and I specialize in stormwater treatment.
Interesting. Could you tell us about that briefly?
My research deals with bioabsorption materials, which is essentially trying to remove nutrients from stormwater through absorption, like you do with carbon, like in a Brita filter, and through uptake of nutrients by bacteria as it rejuvenates itself.
Okay.
And the purpose of this is because nitrogen and phosphorus, which are the two main components of fertilizer, are what is called limiting nutrients, which means that those are the two biggest nutrients that plants and algae need to grow. So I think it's in marine environments, phosphorus is the limiter, and in freshwater environments, it's nitrogen, but I have to check on that one.
Okay.
And the idea is that those nutrients in excess, when they go into areas that are not used to having that much nutrients, you'll get algal blooms, which is when you see, for instance, a lake that's all green on top. That's solid algae. It's not supposed to be that way. Cattails, you also get extensive growth of cattails or water hyacinth, and those will clog off waterways.
Interesting. And so that'll deplete the oxygen for the animals.
It will, because the algae will grow on top of the water. It blocks sunlight, so sunlight cannot get down to the bottom for the plants to grow on the bottom.
Okay.
So if you're not having plants at the bottom of the lake grow, you're not getting oxygen in the water, and then everything dies. And you get big fish. It also affects things like red tide, because you'll have nutrients that flow. A big one in Florida comes from the Everglades agricultural area, which is south of Lake Okeechobee. It flows from there into the Everglades, and the Everglades is supposed to be a nutrient-poor ecosystem, so it doesn't handle it so well when you put large amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus into it.
Sure.
That water then flows into the Gulf, and we've had problems with red tide out there, and that's been linked to the excess loadings of nutrients that are coming into the Gulf.
Okay. Could you tell us what red tide is exactly?
Red tide is a type of algae. It's referred to as an HAB, or harmful algal bloom. The algae will rapidly grow, forming the red tide that you see. It has noxious fumes, which are known to close beaches. It'll cause people to have eye irritation and lung problems. It'll also kill dolphins and fish. So it has economic impacts of closing beaches for tourism, commercial fishing. They've had several impacts on the shrimping industry out in the Gulf. So it loses people's jobs for commercial reasons and for tourism reasons.
Most of that nitrogen come from?
Fertilizers.
Fertilizers, okay.
Yeah.
Generally from what region specifically?
Well, residential has a lot too, because people tend to over-fertilize their lawns.
Sure.
Golf courses throw out a lot, and farming throws out a lot of nutrients.
Okay.
Which is why we tried to get agriculture to not overdose. Which is good for them too, because that's money that they're throwing on the ground that they don't need to.
Right.
It's just getting better and better now of tracking how much fertilizer they put out for having the correct dosages.
Okay.
And we can treat it by putting in stormwater treatment areas, like the in Palm Beach County, South Florida Water Management District has 4. I believe it's 4. I have to check on the number, but they're the biggest stormwater treatment areas in the world.
Oh wow. Okay.
And we do some, and they're used for other things like duck hunting and fishing too.
Good. Would you care to be in the interview here and talk about soil profiles and water loss?
Not sure how much does that go.
Yes. Yep. Shot that. Cool, Rachel.